أهلا بكم في هذا الحوار مع مدير عام صندوق النقد الدولي السيدة كريستالينا جورجيفيا. هذا الحوار يتواكب مع اجتماعات وزراء المالية ورؤساء البنوك المركزية التابعين لمجموعة العشرين. كيف ستعمل هذه المجموعة التي تترأسها المملكة العربية السعودية هذا العام؟ كيف ستعمل هذه المجموعة وهي تضم مجموعة من أكبر اقتصادات العالم من الدول الصناعية والدول النامية؟ كيف ستعمل على مواجهة آثار فيروس كورونا، الآثار الاقتصادية العالمية لفيروس كورونا؟ لكن هذا الحوار أيضا يعني له أهمية خاصة أن السيدة جورجيفيا هي أول من يترأس صندوق النقد الدولي من الدول النامية. هي اقتصادية بلغارية وتأتي كأول رئيس لصندوق النقد الدولي من دولة نامية. كيف أثر ذلك على سياسات جورجيفيا وكيف أصبحت صوتا للفقراء في وسط اقتصادات الكبار؟ هذا هو حوارنا مع السيدة كريستالينا جورجيفيا. Ms. Georgieva, thank you very much for being with us on الحدث and on my program. And let me start by asking you about the G20 meetings. We are still facing the health and economic crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic. The whole world is looking at the ministerial meetings and the central bank meetings of the G20 under the Saudi presidency this year. What should we expect? How can this group with the IMF help the global economy at this phase of the crisis?
It is so very important that we have the G20 coming together in the situation we find ourselves of unprecedented crisis. Already in April, the gathering of ministers of finance and central bank governors led to a synchronized deployment that put a floor under the world economy. Let me just give you the numbers. We at the IMF expect this year the global economy to shrink by 4.9%. 95% of the countries in the world would finish the year with smaller economies than they started this year. What is so tremendously important is that a crisis like no other generated a response like no other. And the G20 was instrumental to bring countries together to exchange experiences and mobilize for this response. Since the beginning of the crisis, fiscal measures that are deployed to put this floor under the world economy are total $11 trillion. And central banks have poured tremendous amount of liquidity so we can continue to function despite the fact that the pandemic led to bringing economies to stand still. The G20, with its global coordination role, helped as a transmission line of measures that has brought a relief to what otherwise could have been a catastrophe. We could have seen massive bankruptcies and massive layouts of workers, but that did not happen. And that community of finance ministers and central bankers has shown the ability and determination to take action. On top of it, we also have seen the G20 caring about the poorest countries. We, the IMF and the World Bank, we called for debt suspension, debt service suspension for the poorest countries. And the G20 massively mobilized the official bilateral creditors so that can actually happen. We have seen, as a result, more than 40 countries being able to stop servicing their debt obligations at a time when they have very little in terms of revenues. And last but not least, we, the IMF, we have done our part. We have provided in short 3 months 72 financial lifelines through emergency financing to countries in most dire need. And tomorrow, the gathering of the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors that is forthcoming is going to be another opportunity for that generating strong collective action in the face of this pandemic.
Speaking about the initiative taken in last April about the debt standstill of the low-income countries, there have been some concerns of some delays, and also some of the countries are worried about the rating issues.
Mm-hmm. It is very important to recognize the tremendous significance of bringing all G20 official lenders together. That has never been done before. So we have to start from that acknowledgement of progress made in bringing the official creditors for debt service suspension. For some countries, the official creditors are not the most important source of financing. It is private creditors. And where we are now concentrated on is to try to bring the private creditors also on board. Countries that are worried of hard-won access to markets that rating agencies might see suspension of service of debt obligations as a negative are hesitant to take part in this initiative. But we will continue to work with the World Bank on debt transparency, on collection of data, so we can bring more capacity to understand what is exactly being done under this initiative, and hopefully make it so that more countries can benefit and that the rating agencies would see this as for what it is. It is an exogenous shock on economies that requires that ease of payment.
How do you evaluate the recovery path? You have said we are not out of the woods yet. When will be out of the woods? When we are going to start seeing the glimpse of a recovery for the global economies?
We are already seeing 3/4 of the world gradually and carefully reopening after the containment measures that have been taken. And this leads to some revival of economic activities, and already some economies are showing that they're returning to higher growth. For example, we just got the data from China for the last quarter, and they are exceeding our original expectations. But we need to acknowledge that the recovery is going to be only partial this year and next, and it is going to be uneven. It would be more in some countries and in some sectors, and less in other countries and other sectors. Why? Because the pandemic is still with us. Until such time we have a medical breakthrough, we have treatment and vaccines, and then we can genuinely look at the pandemic in the rearview mirror, we have to live with it. And that determines this uneven and partial recovery I'm talking about. The more we do to have strong health systems. So people are confident that they would be looked after. And we have prudent measures in reopening that protect us against the pandemic. The more we can rely on the recovery to come.
But that brings me to scientists. Scientists say that there could be a second phase. This is a nightmare for all of us. What would be a second phase for the economies? And maybe the question should be, how can we be prepared for a second phase?
Yep. Where we are today is we understand somewhat better what this virus does and how we can protect ourselves against it. We didn't know that in the first month, in March, February, March, when the pandemic started its terrible round around the world. Now we know. And that means that if there is a second wave, which is possible, we are much better prepared to act in terms of restricting movements and also in terms of safer operations of in our daily lives. And what we are recommending is three things. Number one, prioritize health expenditures, hospitals, doctors, nurses. Two, provide fiscal support to your businesses and to your most vulnerable populations. Don't withdraw this support too quickly. And three, recognize that this pandemic also offers opportunities. Direct your fiscal stimulus towards boosting your competitiveness for the future. The digital economy is definitely a winner of the pandemic. Make sure that you don't lose on this opportunity. I'm particularly concerned that we may see a expansion of the distance between the front runners in digital and those who fall behind. So be sure as a government that you take decisive action in the direction of supporting that transformation. Last but not least, invest in your people, invest in education, invest in social protection. What the pandemic taught us is that we are as strong as our weakest members. So make sure that you provide for the resilience of people, not just the resilience of businesses.
Let me move to the MENA region and the emerging markets, which have been also hit very hard. What is your policy advice to these countries to start a faster recovery?
Well, you're so right. Emerging markets, developing economies are more severely hit. When we look at the world, excluding China, it is a much more brutal impact on emerging markets and developing economies. Why? They are affected by the pandemic itself. Many of them are commodity exporters. They are affected by the drop in commodity prices. Many rely on remittances. They are affected by the drop of remittances. And many developing countries simply have fewer resources. They cannot do as much as advanced economies are doing. So our advice to emerging economies, to policymakers there is, first and foremost, recognize that those with strong fundamentals are in a better place today. So do not shy from taking the measures to build your institutions, your financial system, the stability of your banks, to make sure that you have competitive environment, that your businesses do not face too much red tape. all the things that are important prior to the pandemic, they remain important and are even more important today. Two, prioritize your expenditures, your public expenditures appropriately. One thing I want to tell you that I worry a lot about is what is happening to our children. We know that we are losing in learning because children don't go to school.
Yes.
When we have strong internet-based capacity to move from classroom to digital learning, this is not such a big tragedy. But for countries that don't have that, they may be losing their productive potential for the future. Kids, especially girls, once they stop going to school, they may never go back. So pay attention to this as a priority. And I think I would also speak on behalf of my institution, rely on collaboration, rely on your resources that you can take in a moment of crisis, like the IMF. We are there for you.
Oil exporting countries have had a double hit with the oil prices and the COVID, of course. Do you expect a faster recovery since oil prices are picking up? And again, what is your policy advice for them?
Well, it is really for a very big relief to see that oil prices have recovered almost halfway to where they were before the pandemic. It would depend very much on the trajectory of the overall economic recovery. For next year, 2021, we are projecting 5.4% growth for the world economy. This is not going to bring us at the same level we were before the crisis, but if it materializes, it would give quite a lot of relief to oil exporting countries. What we are recommending to oil exporters, again, is nothing new. It is diversify your economies, so you're less dependent on one sector in the eventuality of future shocks. And also we are seeing those with capacity to take strong fiscal measures doing so. And we are saying to countries, pay special attention to support for your small and medium-sized enterprises. We worry that if support is withdrawn, we may see quite a number of bankruptcies, especially for SMEs. We actually think that it can triple unless there are measures. So as you direct policy support, make sure that the vulnerable parts of the economy are first in line to receive it.
Egypt and the IMF have had a success story, what we call a success story, with very difficult reforms in place. Egypt now has turned to the IMF again with the rapid finance request and also the standby agreement. How do you evaluate the government response to the COVID crisis and the COVID measures, and what can the Egyptian government do to also have a faster and sustainable growth?
Well, Egypt acted very swiftly at the very beginning of the pandemic to protect people, and by doing so, to protect ultimately the economy. And it has been very fast to recognize the necessity of additional buffers. We have been able to provide $2.8 billion of emergency financing, and now we have some over $5 billion in standby arrangement. And Egypt used that very wisely to build reserves and put the brakes on what was dangerously going up, inflation, as well as impact on the currency. The Central Bank of Egypt also acted quite swiftly with more accommodative monetary policy. But above all, what we have seen Egypt doing correctly is to expand social protection because more people, because of the pandemic, found themselves in need of help. As you know, tourism is dramatically impacted. It is a source of revenues for many people that are now that have been really from hand to mouth, relying on daily income, losing this income. But the measures that have been taken to expand social protection are indeed paying off. And our recommendation to Egypt is stay the course. There have been very successful reforms, continue, especially with regard to state-owned enterprises, to increasing the competitiveness of the economy, making sure that there is no red tape for entrepreneurs, and improving even further transparency and accountability of public institutions to the citizens.
Quickly, I want to ask about Lebanon and Tunisia. Lebanon, what is the status of talks? Are talks going on? Are they have been stalled? And what are the challenges? And what is needed from the Lebanese government to move ahead with a deal, for a deal?
Well, the talks are going on. We have been engaged from the moment the government of Lebanon turned to the IMF. We know that what needs to be done is difficult. We saw in the action plan that the government presented to us good elements, but we are not there yet. We haven't yet seen that unity of purpose to take the difficult measures that need to be taken. So we are not yet at the point to have a program to take it to our board of directors. The Lebanese people want to see this being done. Yes. They deserve it to be done, and I very much hope that we would be reaching this positive outcome, but no breakthrough yet.
What is needed from the government to reach this level?
But there are some structural problems in Lebanon in the banking sector in terms of how the burden of what needs to be done is shared across the society. And what needs to happen is to bring everybody on board. There would be some that would have to make sacrifices for the future of Lebanon, and it is not quite obvious that there is an agreement of joining forces for this better future of the country. What we want to see is that everybody, the government, the central bank, the key stakeholders in Lebanon, that they are all united and decisive towards a program that we can support.
Tunisia, when are we seeing the talks resumed, and what kind of program does Tunisia want?
Well, let me first say that we were very quick to support Tunisia with emergency financing, almost $750 million. And I know how important it was and it is to help the country in this very difficult moment. We would like to engage with Tunisia. There has to be internally in the country the formation of a government, and then a clarity of purpose of where this government wants to go. The country knows what the issues are, and once we are in a place where we can engage on the program, we would do our best to build a good pathway for inclusive growth that benefits people. We all remember how people of Tunisia very strongly stepped up for themselves. We remember the sacrifice that initiated a process of transformation. We are an institution that wants to see growth that benefits everybody, and we would be there once there is a government in place.
My last question. You have been you are the first person coming from an emerging market to preside over the IMF or such a big international financial institution. You have seen poverty in your country. You have seen inequality. Did this affect you? Did this reshape the way you think, where you come from? Did this reshape the way you think to become more of a voice of the poor amidst all the big players in the global economy?
It certainly does. I remember vividly in the 90s when my mother lost all her savings because of bad policies, and I was queuing at 4 o'clock in the morning to buy milk for my daughter. I know the cost of bad policies and bad governance, and I know the benefits of good policies, policies that are for people. And that is what I bring to the fund.
What worries you the most? What worries you the most? Inequality, poverty, women inequality? What worries you the most?
You know, in this crisis, what I pray for, and you can say that is what worries me that we may not do it, is that we take out of the crisis the lessons to become more resilient. More resilient as a society does mean to address inequality, but it also means to think of a development that is not only fiscally sustainable, but it is also environmentally sustainable and it is socially sustainable, where we open up opportunities for everyone. As a result, we are a stronger and richer world. And what worries me is that we may squander this opportunity of a crisis. I really would do all I can from my position that we don't do that, we actually capture this opportunity. Going back, the global financial crisis in which the financial stability was severely undermined led us to building resilience in the banking sector. Today, we benefit from it. Banks globally are sound and solid. We have to do the same from this crisis to build resilience to shocks, to pandemic, to climate shocks, and to do so, first and foremost, we need to build an inclusive society where everybody can reach their full potential.
It is quite interesting for me how I can see how you are an optimist, and you can see there is always an opportunity within that crisis. Ms. Kristalina Georgieva, I want to thank you very much for this chance and for this interview. And my next interview will be on your live route from Bulgaria to the IMF.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.